Welcome to Cute Widgets and More.
Today we'll do something crazy. Well, besides introducing my daughter Louise into this Cute Widgets and More series, we will... Wait, did I say crazy? I meant, of course, Clazy. We will talk about Clazy and ClangTidy and how you use them from within Qt Creator. So what is Clazy and what is ClangTidy? Well, both of them are static code analyzers, meaning you do not need to run your code to actually get errors. It's more like when you compile your code, you get warnings, and these are additional warnings on your code. ClangTidy is generic. It can tell you about stuff like override keyword missing, while Clazy is Qt specific. It can tell you if you, for example, use the old style from Qt 4 signal slot connections or many other things. And why would you want to use them? Well, to improve the quality of your code, to improve the speed of your code. There's, for example, one which tests for whether you detach for loops. Don't know what that is? Better stay tuned. Let's look at some code. You are likely already using ClangTidy and Clazy in your code, at least within Qt Creator. You can see there's errors or warnings over here. But if I want to run it myself, what I can do is I can go to my debug tag and click that small arrow. Instead of debugger, I can choose ClangTidy and Clazy. And now I have two buttons here that are rather useful. The first button is this one here. That one says run ClangTidy and Clazy on the current file. And you can see I did that, and it is spitting out some errors and warnings to, well, not errors, warnings to me here. The first one is the one that you already saw up there, and I can look at it in more detail here by right-clicking, and I can go to the web page. And this, very nice, obviously was renamed recently. Let's take this one here. Go to the web page, and over here I can now see the description. If I want to see the other one, the one that I failed with, just checks, and here I can see each of the checks. Okay, so that's the first thing. I can also actually fix the code from within Qt Creator. I can, of course, go and see it says to me that I should be using Q environment variable is empty instead. And I can go up here to, let's just double click it. I can go to this line and fix it, or I can simply say targeting and apply fix it. And now when it says yes to that, you can see it actually did fix my code. Unfortunately, there is a bug in Qt 5.0.2. If you're using that, then you might want to upgrade. And there is a link just below me to that page or that bug report that I sent on this particular thing. But let me show you one other thing. If you haven't seen this before, get ready to get your mind blown. In Qt 5.0. I don't know, not Qt Creator 5.0. So whenever I said Qt 5.0, I meant Qt Creator 5.0. It actually now up here, observe the light bulb, else enter, and it tells me this error, but what it does, enter. And now it actually did that refactoring for me on that particular line. What I was missing was to add the Q as const. I'll put out an episode eventually about why that is needed, because that is not super trivial and obvious. But hey, why do I need to know if Qt Creator can tell me about these errors? Beautiful. So it is super useful to have Clazy and ClangTidy run on your code all the time and warn you more or less the second you type something wrong. But if you haven't done Clazy and ClangTidy before, it might actually be useful to run on your whole project and start learning from the warnings that it gives you and start fixing them. Let me show you how you run it on the whole project. But before we do that, let's just see a few lines of code, and you can pause at that second and tell me if you can figure out what is wrong in those lines of code. Are you ready? I have some code here. The error message is just about to show up in the editor. But before I do that, can you spot what the error is? Okay, Go. 2 errors, it says. There's a missing reference in range 4. Oh yeah, it should have been QString reference or possibly const QString reference. And then there is this detachment of the range loop. So this one returns me a list, and up here, due to reference counting of QString list, it will actually detach, meaning it will copy all these 3 elements, which is likely not what I want. I can fix those, but let's try and see there we are. Let's try and see ClangTidy and Clacy in action on our whole project. So what we do, instead of pressing this button, I'll press this button and it will ask me which file do you want to run on. I could specify if I had lots of subdirectories, I could specify some of them. Or, and this is a really awesome one, open file. Well, if I had a bunch of files open that I wanted to, no, this is a really awesome one on the edited file. So I just, for some reason, edited main.cpp. So make that a habit whenever you are about to make a commit. Just run Clang and ClangTidy and Clacy on your commit with the edited file here, and then it will test just those files. But let's run it on all files, analyze, and now it's compiling my code first because it needs a compiled version of my application. And now it's running the analysis here. I already fixed those in main.cpp, so it's left over here are exactly those errors that we saw right up here. So before we proceed, let me show you 2 error situations. One of them actually made me file a bug report against Qt Creator, and then I had to realize, yeah, I wasn't that clever. And the other one made me conclude numerous times that my Clacy didn't work in Qt Creator. Fortunately, with Qt Creator 5.0, they now show me a pretty obvious warning, at least when I understand what it is. So let's see the situation. The first one is, so I tried to run Clacy on a file outside of my project. So here I have a file, main.cpp, that comes from column header length adapter. And if you notice, it's not in the boldface. Clacy examples is in boldface. So my current project is Clacy examples. I have a file here outside of my project. Now I go Clacy, ClangTidy, there we are. And I say run on this particular file. And what it tells me is cannot analyze current file, blah, 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 is not a known source file. It is a known source file. I know it. And it's a source file. What is not known about it to this current existing project? And the point is that Clacy needs to build this file in the setup with the right if-def set and everything for my project. And if it's outside, how does it know that the hash mark, if foo bar should be set or not set? It doesn't know. That's what your build setup tells you. So it can only do those files inside your project. Okay, cool. I can understand that. Let's close this one here again. And we're back in our own files here. Looking at this header file, it's a big header file. So let me try and run Clacy on that one too. And by the way, if you haven't already made a key binding, you should definitely create a key binding for analyze this file, and Control-Shift-A is what my key binding says now. That runs the equivalent of pressing the analyze this file tool button. And it says, cannot analyze current file, home, blah, 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 blah. It's not a known source file. Oh, come on, it's known, it's in my project. Oh, wait, it's not a source file. It needs a compilation unit to be able to analyze. It will, of course, if I do something really weird here. This is really weird, isn't it? Like writing overwrite, there is nothing to overwrite. And you can see that it complains about it, but if I want to run that, I will have to run it from here. Now, if I run it from here, Control-Shift-A, as part of including my class.h, it will complain, failed to analyze one file. Yeah, so it didn't even compile. Again, it needs to be able to compile. So a bad example for that. But nevertheless, when you see it's not a known source file, there's 2 things. Either it's not known in the project or it's not a source file. Once you run Clacy and Clang Tidy on your whole code base, you will have, if you've never done it before at least, lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of warnings. Some of them might not make that much sense. For me, for example, I have a lot of global static in my project, and Clacy tells me that is okay to have if you're an application. And I'm an application, I'm not a library. So those you want to turn off. But there might be others that you actually want to turn on that are not turned on right away. And let's see the source code here. When you look at this source code, if you look really careful, there is actually a few errors, or not really errors, but abuses. First of all, we have up here a virtual void go, and that's in the class foo that bar subclasses from. I have my virtual void go here, but should it say virtual? Shouldn't it say override as we do in C++11? I know that in 2010, we wrote it like this, or right, something like this, to indicate that it was a virtual. But these days we should use the override. But there's no warning. You can see I can run my Clacy on this file here, Control-Shift-A for me, analyzing nothing. How about down here? I have return a.exec. I'll bet you've written that a million times and you haven't thought of it. But when you do that, it's not running exec on this instance here that you created. It's actually a global, it's a static method. So should you not be writing instead return q application : exec? How about you pause now and see how many errors you can find? In the meantime, what I'll do is I'll click here on projects. I'll go to Clang tools. I will say, I do not want to use the global. I want to use a customized one. And then what should that one be? Well, QM, I already had that. So let's remove it. And then we can create it again. Up here, take this one, make a copy of it. And I can call it QAM. And now I have Clang Tidy and Clacy. I can configure my test. So let's go over to Clacy and say, I want all of Clacy. So that is level 0, no false positive. It is level 1, very few false positive. It's level 2, more false positive. So it could be warnings where it's not really an error. And I'll show you how you can take it and turn it off for individual warnings. It's manual level, very few false positive, and ... whatever that means. Let's not bother about that. So lots of different warnings. We can also go to Clang Tidy, and Clang Tidy come with a lot of stuff. So if you are an Android developer, you might want to turn that off or turn that on. Or if you're working on LLVM, this one, or in Google or in Fuchsia or Darwin or whatever, there's a bunch of different ones. So let's take all the core guidelines. All of Clang is here already. All of Modernize. I don't know what's in MISC, so let's take all of these and let's take all the read-only. The portability. Now I've taken all of those that performance. Okay. Now I've taken all of those that are not specific for specific projects. Okay to that. And now I'm using QAM here and escape to go back. And let's just, before it gets to me, let me run Clang Tidy and Clacy, and let's analyze this file. Are you ready? It's ahead of me over here, up here already. But now you can see that go away. You can see here that prefer using override or rarely final instead of virtual. And down here, that was the static member accessed through instance. That's actually from the Clang Tidy readability static access through instance. You can see each of the tests that we have up here. Once you've done that and you turned all of the tests on, you will find there's lots and lots of complaints, some that you don't even understand and some you don't care about. And we have two categories. We have the whole category you don't agree. It might be saying that you should use the multi-arc rather than .arc. You might say, well, I think that .arc sounds fun to say that, is more readable than .arc and then something, something. And actually, if you do that with the something, you might actually end up with a string, an integer, and that will give you a complete different result than what you expected. That's the one category of things where a whole category you dislike. The other is just a single one of them. So the a.exec, for example. Yes, I know that it's a global, or it's a static method. And yes, I could call it as QApplication : exec. But actually, I like it saying a.exec instead, because I've done that my whole life. And you can turn off individual warnings like this. And the end goal is to have your project entirely free of any warning from Clang, Tidy, and Clazy, because then you will notice whenever you do something wrong, just as you type, the warning will come up. And in addition, you can have on your CI. So whenever you commit some code, going to the CI, that it can actually run Clang, Tidy, and Clazy for you and mark it as an error on your project if it's not entirely clean. I have that on my project. I love it. But let's get back and see how you can turn off errors, turn off warnings on categories and individual instances. Let's try and go through a few of those warnings that we got from this massive turning on warnings from both Clang, Tidy and from Clazy. So the first one here says foo should take QObject parameter in constructor, and that is my foo class. Where is that even? There we are. That's my foo class. It doesn't have a constructor. It should. So I should really have done something like this to make it go silent on me here. Using QObjects, : QObjects, semicolon. And now that error will go away, hopefully eventually up here. That's if I spelled it correct, it would go away. So now they'll be running behind the scene again, and you'll notice that it will not show up this one. Okay, so that was the first one. Then using a trailing return type for function for this function, it comes from modernizing. So modernize, it doesn't start with the word Clazy, so that's a Clang Tidy one. It's modernized using trailing return type. So it says that I should actually reuse trailing return type, but it comes from my Q_object macro. So that is slightly beyond my pay scale to fix that. I can add, just for this particular one, I can say, do not show this warning. What I can do is I can go and right click on it here, and I can say, and I can never remember, suppress this diagnostic or disable this check. I think it's suppress this diagnostic. Let's see if I did it correct. It shows up over here and saying main.cpp, use a trailing return type. This diagnostic here will no longer be shown. And unfortunately, it's only in my IDE. Actually, if I don't know, it's just super annoying. I would like that to go into a separate file of its own. My coworkers will definitely not have this one suppressed. So personally, I don't use that much. Not using much in my term means I never use it. Okay, the other way that I can do it is that I can, of course, let's go and see, using a Q keyword slots. So Clazy thinks that I shouldn't be using, okay, let's run it again, because now I made a change to my code, and I already did that. I made a change to my code, and therefore my line number isn't correct anymore. We are analyzing again, takes just a little bit of time. And here, using Q keyword slots. So what Clazy would like me is to rewrite it to Q_slots. And yes, that makes a lot of sense. If I'm a library developer where I do not want to risk conflict on the keyword slots, but I can live with that. So what I can do here is now right click on this one, and I'll take the other one, disable this check, I think. And let's just go over here again, check, it didn't show up. So disable this check was definitely the right one. Now it will go away forever. And what it really did, go to projects again and go to my Q widgets and more. It was a Clazy check, and you can see it's not, because now this one down here, cute keywords, we just check the web page if we are not entirely sure. Yes, that's the one that says that I shouldn't be using emit slot signals, and for each I should be using these macros instead. So now that one is gone forever. And let me just show you another way to do it. And I am really rather undecided whether that's a good idea or not. I really hope that I can convince one day, and there's a bug report just below me, that the Qt project, wrong one, that the Qt project should rename one of these so that I can remember which one is which one. In the meantime, what I can do, and let's just take one of the other here. So it prefer the override. Let's just take that one. I can move my cursor on top of the warning sign here, and I can move over to this cross. And now that actually did the, let me go and find it here. And it was a Clang tidy, this one. And you can see CPP, core guideline, explicit virtual function. I now turn that off. Yes, it is nice that I can do it like that. But on the other hand, I'm also really worried that one day I'll be doing something and I'll be blah, 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 and then all of a sudden I managed to press the cross and something very important is gone. Okay, before we proceed enabling and disabling, it might be a good idea to actually know whether a given warning is just one time or I see it a lot of places. So what I can do is that I can take this, let's just take this one here, a constructor called this one here, and I can right click on it and I can say filter for this diagnostic. So it was only one place. Trust me, in my code, I see that a lot of places. I can go up to the filter here and I can select all again, so I see all of the filters. And while we're there, actually, it's nice that I can go up here and I can select all with fixit. So these three, unfortunately, do not have a fixit, but all the others have. So now I can look at those that actually has a fixit. That means that they can actually, I can do this of saying this one and then apply fix, and it will fix the code for me. So that's right click on it and choose a filter for this diagnostic, or okay, yeah, I know this is a readability, I brace access around. Still undecided whether I like that or not. Let's just throw it away just for this run of Clang tidy and Clazy, where I'm going through all my errors. Let's just throw that one away, filter out this definition, and I don't see those. And now I can continue on going through all of those. And then in your own code base, you likely have hundreds or thousands of warnings, and just take your time, go through them, understand them, say, yeah, do I want that? Do I not want that? And then apply the fixit. Likely not from within here, because it unfortunately crashes at least, or it breaks the code, at least in my current version, but possibly from the command line. I'll show you in next video how to run Clang tidy and Clazy from the command line. But besides disabling a whole category, sometimes you just want to say to Clazy or to Clang tidy, I know that you are not happy with this, and you saw that the Clazy had some of them marked as very few false positives. So sometimes there is a false positive. Let me show you how you can disable individual lines of checks, not in the way of putting them into this file that only goes into your project for yourself, but by editing your source code. It goes like this. First, you need to figure out, is it a Clang tidy or a Clazy error, because you do it differently with them. Actually, in upcoming versions of Clazy, it might actually do the same way as Clang tidy. Of course, I had my good friend Sergio actually consider that. So let's hope that he'll come to that conclusion. But over here we have two that are Clang tidy, and the way that you fix those are by adding something like this: no lint, meaning do not test this line here. And if I ran my test again for just this file, you will notice that, well, it stopped complaining about this already over here. The other one is sometimes it's difficult to get that written on a line, especially if you use Clang format, because then the line will actually be so long that it starts breaking it into a new line when you add that no lint. So instead, what you can do is on the previous line, you can write no lint. Oh, I can never remember. Sorry. Therefore, I have this cheat file here where I have my 5 different versions here. No lint next line, meaning do not do anything on the next line. So that is Clang tidy. For Clazy, going over here, we have the Clacy exclude, and then as a comment, Clacy exclude the name of the test. So we have this one down here saying something about a for loop. Well, we have it over here in my class, don't we? Here we have this warning coming up right now. There we are. You can see Clacy range loop. So if I add Clacy exclude range loop, then it will not run that test on this specific line. But notice if I save, oh, that was easy. Let's rename Depeche Mode to Depeche Mode. There we are. And now save, then it went down to the next line, and it might be a token on this line up here that made it complain. So in that situation, unfortunately, I do not have a no lint next line. Sergio, are you listening in? That's why we want that. So instead, I will have to exclude it throughout the whole file. So now when I add this one here, then it will not produce this error on the whole file from this point on and on. And sometimes I have files in Clacy that I simply, or files in my project I simply do not want Clacy to run on. Then I can do Clacy : skip. No, not : Clacy : skip, and Clacy will not complain. But as you can see, I still get complaints from ClangTidy. I haven't found a way, at least, to make ClangTidy not look at a specific file. That's it for this episode of Qt Widgets and More. One thing I'm missing is integration with CI, and maybe in the future I'll put out an episode on CI integration with that. But the first step in that, if you want to try that at home, is to get Clacy and ClangTidy executing on the command line. It's not entirely trivial. The documentation tells you exactly how to do that, but I'll dedicate the next episode showing you each of the steps so you don't need to read through lengthy documentation for that. An added benefit of doing it from the command line is that you can look at your project and you can see, oh yeah, we have this issue of Q_object macro not being added to my classes. And yes, I understand why I should do that. Instead of changing it 300 different places, you could go and change it in from the command line. Just run Clacy on all of your projects and get them all, or all of your files, and get them all fixed in one go. And then you will commit just that one change. So whoever is doing code review can look at it and understand what is this particular thing about, and then validate each of them rather than having 20 different kind of changes in one commit. But that's for next time. And until then, have a great day.